We've got to turn now to money, power, politics, my favorite part of the show. Newly minted Democratic frontrunner Elizabeth Warren, she has got Wall Street on edge, some would say in a full-blown panic. Headline after headline with ominous warnings about dropping markets, investors running scared from the prospect of Elizabeth Warren being our next president. But here's what I want to talk about. Recent events are fueling Warren's entire message for more regulation. The implosion of WeWork and the billion-dollar exit package for its founder. A failure of oversight for Boeing that led to planes crashing. And how about the Wall Street looting of firms like Toys R Us and Payless that leave the businesses gutted, the employees without jobs, and shareholders making off like bandits. These examples, given Warren's message that voters need to have more power, Voters need to step up, and regulation has to protect them. That is only helping her message. I want to talk about this with two of my favorites, Scott Galloway, professor at the NYU School of Business, and Josh Brown, CEO of Ritholtz Wealth Management. Gentlemen. Oh, nice new glasses. Josh, every time you go to a dinner with Wall Street traders, investors, they're panicked about Elizabeth Warren. Yeah. But do they not see that Adam Neumann of WeWork, walking away from a company that he blew up with $1.7 billion, and then soon after, we're going to see 2,000 of their employees get fired? Did they not see that will quickly become the rallying cry for Elizabeth Warren's campaign?
Right. So as Scott will tell you, the fallout from that hasn't even concluded yet. We haven't even seen what the damage will be. And the thing with WeWork is it's so illustrative and it's so simple to understand because everyone gets it. It's not one of these complicated finance stories. I think what terrifies Wall Street executives, though, is not just the anti-financial services rhetoric. They've become accustomed to that over the last 10 years since the crisis. It's the specificity. There has never been a presidential candidate up until now who understands how private equity has become a trillion-dollar industry, who understands where all the pressure points are. I've called her a skilled acupuncturist. When she put out her proposals, she knows exactly where to put the needles. And even Democrats working on Wall Street, people who work in financial services, they are desperate for it to not be Elizabeth Warren.
But it's Wall Street, it's corporate America, Scott, sure, that are giving her this specific platform.
Yeah, if they want her to be president, they should continue to talk about what's going to happen if she's made president. They're basically cementing her as the leader right now. And the markets are very difficult to predict. And one could argue that a disjointed foreign policy, income inequality, record levels of debt while we have record levels of unemployment, which we've never seen before, exploding our balance sheet. One could make the argument that these are the real threats to the market long term. So we don't know what's going to happen. What we know is when there's constant conjecture from the most unlikable group of people in the world, and that is, quote unquote, this silent majority of business people who claim it'll be a disaster, that Elizabeth Warren just raised a ton of money every time someone says the market's going to go down because of Elizabeth Warren.
But even if they stop talking,
yeah,
do they not see what their corporate actions are doing? Look at Facebook.
Yeah.
We could say, oh, look at those lawmakers grilling Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg's company made $110 million that day, and he went home laughing.
So you talk about private equity involved with Toys R Us. Let's look at all the newspaper companies that some of these private equity titans have bought and subsequently had to have closed or decided to close. And then let's talk about some of the other businesses they've got involved with, retailers that have just gone away after their involvement. Those people would argue, you know what? Newspapers were a dying industry anyway. It was going to happen. Retail is dying anyway. It was going to happen anyway. And what Elizabeth Warren has done is she said, no. Let me explain to you what's really happening. You people are pulling dividends out of the system, cash payments to yourself. You are laying off the risk on the employees of these companies. You are encouraging other banks to lend to a business that's already swimming in debt and making a bad situation worse. And so all of the policies that she's laid out, and her words, not mine, to rein in Wall Street, again, they're highly specific. They're targeted directly at this managerial class within private equity that wins no matter what the outcome is for the business. And what she's trying to do is make it so that the employees have protection in case an an LBO, leverage buyout, goes wrong, trying to make it so that if it blows up, at least the pensions and retirements will be covered. That is not currently the case now, as we saw with many of the newspapers I referenced. So she's got not just like Bernie comes out and says, business is bad. She's laying it out for you exactly why it's bad and what she wants to do to change it.
If CEOs like the CEO of GE doesn't want to see Elizabeth Warren in power, why freeze the pensions of thousands of your employees?
Yeah, but General Electric is a good example. That's an example of a company whose core competence moved from operations to tax avoidance, and that ultimately came back to bite them. What we have is not a failure of markets or a failure of capitalism. We have a failure of regulation. We keep waiting to call for these companies to call on their better angels, and that Mark Zuckerberg is going to all of a sudden discover a concern or a regard for the Commonwealth. And he wakes up every morning, and quite frankly, he does his job in a pure play capitalism, and that is he just focuses on earnings, he lies, he delays, he obfuscates, he takes advantage of a Congress where only 4% of the elected officials have a background in technology or engineering. And we wake up with a platform that, again, 4 years later is being weaponized by outside forces. So waiting for the better angels of these companies is not going to happen. This is so far, the failures we're talking about are a failure of a lack of regulation, not a failure of the markets.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.